Alright, we're gonna talk about this finally, aren't we? Okay, so in this video, I want to turn your attention to this topic that's basically a meme nowadays. And that topic is how do you make cinematic images? And I'm going to keep saying cinematic in that accent and, maybe play a drinking game and take a shot at each time I say cinematic. Right, yeah. It's basically a meme now. Like everybody it's so overused and everybody wants to achieve this kind of a look and it's basically a meme now. And but no problem. I think it's fun. I'm just messing around. I'm just being goofy over here. But when you talk about this, right? It seems to be a mystery that if you search on YouTube, there's a lot of tutorials that talk about how to achieve cinematic frames, including the one I made with which I privated that video like a few months ago because it's stupid as shit. Like I clearly didn't know as much as I know like now, and I was running my mouth here pretending to be smart. And when I watched that video, I just want to pull down my pants, grab my balls and hit it with a hammer because that video is stupid, right? And no offense, but yeah, I guess. But some people might say that, and including me, I say that, what is cinematic? Well, cinematic images is, dude, it has to be like, because Hollywood movies are high budget and they have all the gear in the world. It's some people say it's the gear, right? But clearly this is not true because some people use Blender and they made quite cinematic images. So this is out of the way like right away. Some people might also say that it's probably the lighting, man. The way they lit their images, it's probably it, right? Some people might also say, dude, probably it's because it's so realistic, man, because it's a person, right? And some people might say it's it's the acting, it's the actor. Some people might say it's the, dude, it's the camera. It's going back to gear again, anyways. But now, dude, it's the production design, right? It's the concept of it. It's the set, right? Some people might say that cinematic images are, caused by one of these. Well, in truth, I think while people say what makes a cinematic image and they point to each one of this or more than one of this or even all of this kind of aspects, I think if we do that, we're being too zoomed in. We're being too myopic. We're too zoomed in, right? I think in order to understand what makes an image cinematic, we have to kind of zoom out a little bit, right? And really understand what is the purpose of making films. Actually, like what is the actual purpose of cinema, right? Well, some people might say it's self-expression. Some people might say it's communication. Some people might say it's for selling shit, selling toys, right, with superhero movies. And some people might say that it's for propaganda, right? I don't know. But in the end of the day, I think whether or not it's for ads, for whatever expression, in the end of the day, I think cinema, like for me, is always telling a story, right? In the end of the day, like an advertisement is still a story, a propaganda is still a story, right? Self-expression requires a story, right? Because that's how we relate as humans. And cinema, the medium of cinema, is no different than that, than any other medium. To be honest with you, in the end, we're trying to communicate something, no matter how abstract that thing might be. So, I think if we zoom out, we'll see that it's about the story. Now that we know the purpose, right? At least now we kind of understand what the purpose is, and we'll put this. We'll get back to this. I promise. Just put this in the back of your head for now. But in the past, I've said that in the video that cinematic images is sculpting with your light. Oh shit, I can't even write. Well, you're a light, right? And again, by saying that, I was being too myopic. I was too zoomed in. Okay? And saying cinematic is sculpting with your light is like saying that a human is a foot, right? Well, that's okay. A foot is a part of a human, but it's not the whole human, right? A human is every single thing. A foot is just a part of it. And I think due to my incomplete understanding, I came to this conclusion because that's what I saw at that moment, right? That's what I saw, the difference between an image that looks quote unquote cinematic and an image that doesn't look quite cinematic, right? And then I moved forward, right? I moved forward, like I start to do some searching. Okay, well, if that's not what makes an image cinematic, then what makes an image cinematic? Oh, probably it's an image that serves the story, right? And I think I'm getting pretty close there. But I also say that an image that serves the story in a way that constrained and simple, right? And that might be true. I think I'm being closer by saying that. So then I went from this into okay, it's story based, you know, and simple. And by saying this, I also already include this because this is now a given, right? Because you have to sculpt with your light. But more than that, in the end of the day, I thought it was only about story based and simple. So what do I mean by story based, right? By story based, I mean every single decision in that frame is there to support the story, right? And it's about asking what's in the frame and why is in the frame, right? And if it's a story about two people fighting, then the frame should only be two people fighting. Okay? And if it's about two people fighting, then it shouldn't be a shot of two people fighting and then an awesome car that you model in the background, and then the foreground is this awesome rock that you found on Megascans, and then the midground there's a juicy ground material that you ended up using 18 millimeter lens, and you're so far away from the actor. Okay, and that's not story based because you're showing too much, you're telling too much, you're not focusing on the story, right? What happens on the frame should serve a function. And sometimes it's painful, especially when you come from a concept art perspective, to not show lots of cool stuff. But in the end of the day, that's the discipline, right? That's what I thought the most important thing of what makes an image cinematic, right? And for me, now looking back, I think this is a pretty good understanding of it, right? But I think it's about only 85% there, right? And why do I say that? I'll get to it, but let's focus on this first because I think this is important to understand as well. And what else? So where was I? So story based, right? And again, every single decision is planned. That's why if you see these aspects, lighting, realistic actors, production design, and if you see a frame, the lighting, it's realistic. Obviously, if it's live action, it's supposed to be realistic, right? Right? Or is it? We'll get to that later. But the lighting, actors, production design, everything is planned and then moves together as a beautiful ensemble, right? And everything, in the end of the day, again, serves the story, right? So I think if you're asking what's the easiest thing that I can do, like the easiest win to get my image closer to a cinematic quality, is to tell less stories, right? If you're trying to tell a story, like let me give you an example of my old personal work. Okay, if you're trying to tell a story about a person getting into a house and found two drunk people passed out, then why am I showing all of this? Why is this crate all in the foreground and this why this in the background? Well, this is an environment concept art, right? This is not a cinematic frame, but why am I showing this if I'm doing cinematic? It should have been the shot, probably, right? I'm not saying this should be the shot. The shot should probably over the shoulder shot of the soldier, and then looking at the passed out soldiers. I think that should be a shot. It should be simple. We can get rid like 70% of all of this and still tell the stories. Okay? To have brevity. And that coupled with everything planned here. And that's why that if you see student films, right? If you see student films, they rarely look quote-unquote cinematic because a student film is usually, well, it's a student film, right? It's usually pretty low budget, so they don't have much budget on the lighting, on the production design. They probably can't hire the most professional actors, writers, and stuff like that. That's why it doesn't look quote-unquote cinematic, because it's not as planned. And this will relate to something that I'm gonna mention later, but keep this in mind. Now, because everything is planned, it turns into what? Well, to me now, it turns basically into a painting, right? And there's a saying, and their YouTube channel name is, there's a saying, every frame a painting, right? It's also the name of a YouTube channel. A painting. And this is true to a T, because when you're making films, every frame is literally a painting, right? And a painting is a medium where everything is planned, right? If you're painting, you planned every single aspect on that image, right? You planned it because you have to paint it yourself, right? So the lack of planning will sometimes result in a result that you probably don't like. And the caveat is, because this is cinema, you still have to adhere to the simplicities and the rules of story-based images. But then I think more about it. Is that true at all? Like, do I have to really, like, is cinematic really means simplicity and focus on the story? Well, in a way that's true, right? If you're making a particular type of a movie, or if the art that you make wants to emulate that Hollywood look, that professional look, then that is true, right? It's a painting, but it should, again, be a slave to the story and be as brave, as simple as possible. Focus on the story, focus on what's important. And then I thought about it some more. Okay, yeah, that's for commercial, like mainstream look, but how do you explain films like the Color of Pomegranates by Sergei Parajanov here, right? The composition is not exactly your standard cinema composition. It's more like a painting to me, right? These two and this, right? It's not quote-unquote realistic. It's pretty staged, right? And how do you explain Wes Anderson as well, right? And then how do you explain Tarsem Singh?